Slight pause there in the middle of the thing.
Do I have to push
It's all
anybody?
ready. It's all ready to go.
This is a home evening at the home of, family home evening at the home of Cheri and Dick and Brian and David and Geraldine. And we're all meeting with them tonight. This is Monday, June the 16th, 1975. And it looks like we've had a good time singing and prayer, and now we're just going to talk into the microphone a little bit. I was forewarned this morning that I was supposed to say something about pleasant memories or childhood memories or things I remember about my past, right? While I was thinking about this, the thing came to mind that how important it is to have happy memories. And maybe you've all heard about this marvelous computer bank we have, memory bank we have in our mind that stores up everything that we see and hear and witness and experience, and whether we keep them conscious, these memories conscious before us or not, still are back there, and under proper stimulus they can be brought out. So if we have pleasant memories, like most of us do, then as we are reminded of these things as we get older, we can have happy thoughts of our early days. Maybe this is living in your second childhood, just reliving the things you remember. The things I remember that are pleasant are the things I want to remember, and the things that are unpleasant we try to forget. So it's more fun to think of the happy times. And as I look back, I have a lot of fond memories of my early childhood days at home. I remember helping my dad pour concrete, and we had to mix it by hand, and we used a wheelbarrow and carried it down the basement, and just a little patch at a time we finally got the whole basement finished. And he had several men from the neighborhood, and they'd gather around a big pile of cement and sand, and each with a shovel, and they'd turn it over and over until finally it was mixed up. And they'd put it in a wheelbarrow and wheel it down, and somebody would trowel it out smooth, and they even let me play around with that a bit. And then I remember my dad letting me work down the basement with some old scraps of lumber he had, and how proud I was when I made a funny-looking little table for my mother, and how they made me feel by taking it and putting it there in the front room and letting everybody see it. And now I think back, it was pretty crude, but still, they made me feel real important by having it up where people could see it. And then I remember when I was in school, after I started school, during the summers I used to ride with my dad when he was out repairing telephones at people's places, and we used to travel along, sometimes up on the toll lines, the telephone lines up over Parley's Canyon, and it took a little longer to get there. And I remember singing with him, and one of our favorite songs was Let the Rest of the World Go By, and we'd harmonize sort of, and we really enjoyed this time together. And then I remember the good cooking that we always had at home, and Cheri reminded me of this by having some good old bread pudding. One of Mother's favorites was bread pudding. That was one of our favorite recipes, and one of her good dishes. Another were baked beans, and I think that Maurine has pretty well learned how to cook baked beans. In fact, maybe a little bit better, because she has a better pot to cook them in. And then something else we used to have that was real good was tomato soup. And she'd take a can of tomatoes, and can't tell you any more about how it was done other than she'd strain the tomatoes out and then just use the juice. We didn't bottle tomatoes because it was hard to make them keep with methods they had then. And I remember putting some soda in, for what reason I don't know, but it would foam it up, and it'd always come right up to the top of the big pot, but never quite go over. And then something else. She used to bake bread 2 or 3 times a week, and on the day she'd bake bread, it seemed like we nearly always had scones for lunch. Just bread dough that was pulled off in pieces and flattened out and thrown in the deep fat in the frying pan. And gee, that was delicious. And then as I go on, other things that I enjoyed was when we got big enough to take music lessons, I had to practice at the piano. I didn't like that, but as I got a little older, my folks let me get a clarinet, and I learned to play that is somewhat, so I could play in the band at school. And then the next year, the second year at band, they didn't have a bass horn player, and so I got the bass horn, and I practiced a little bit till they let me play that. And that was a lot of fun because we carried our instruments to all the games, the football and the basketball games and track meets and everything. And while I wasn't good enough to play on any of the athletic teams, I was good enough to go see them all because I could play in the band. And then we marched up and down during all the Christmas parades and all the celebrations. And I got a picture somewhere of me right up in the front row in the front corner right next to the photographer when he took our picture marching down Main Street. And that seems like a funny thing now, but it was fun at the time too.
Was it in the paper?
It was in the Deseret News, I believe, or the Salt Lake Tribune. And then more fun things. We didn't have family home evening exactly like we do now. We didn't have any direction from the church leaders, but it seemed just the usual thing for us to gather on Monday nights. And we'd stand around the piano and we'd sing, and Dad would get an Irish potato or sweet potato, whatever they called them, and he'd play that. And
was it always Monday night?
it was Monday nights, always.
How do you play an Irish potato?
Ocarina, I guess they call them too. And he also played a harmonica and taught us kids how to play the harmonica. And the girls could all play the piano, and would take turns performing and doing funny things, maybe reciting a little poetry, very much like we do now, except we never had any spiritual lesson that I remember. But sometimes Dad would read a story to us, and Billy Whiskers there was a whole series of Billy Whiskers books, and he used to read stories to us from that. And then the highlight of the evening seemed to be a dish of candy, a little penny candy type that Mother would get for that special occasion, and this was the treat we had. And then, I don't know, there's just a lot of happy things that the more you look back, the more you can remember. I remember it seemed like while my mother was active in the church, she taught primary, and she's an Relief Society presidency. Dad never did very much in the church, but with all the things Mother did, she was always home. We'd come home from school, and she'd be there ironing or working around the house, and Dad was always home in the evening. And these are pleasant things that I remember about home. And as I grew older and went on my mission, when I came back from that, it seemed like about that time the family all got split up. The war had broken out then, and my sisters were in different parts of the world. Marion was down in Turlock, California at the Japanese concentration camp. Louise was over in Colorado, one of the Army bases, doing something, secretary or something, and Lynn was the commanding general secretary at Fort Douglas, and she was married and gone, and Buzz was off to school, and Harley was at Pendleton, Oregon in the Air Force, and we never had too much time for the family to get together after that, because a little of the time we all got married and moved away. But I believe everybody has real pleasant memories of their home life, or at least they should have, because these are the things that will carry them through as they get their own homes and own families, and these are the things they like to tell their kids, and pretty much the way they'll live their lives, by the examples and experiences they've had before. So I hope everybody has a happy set of memories.
What did you do? What, your little boy?
We weren't playing football out in the street or playing with the rest of the kids. We were playing in the mud, building roads. Oftentimes in the backyard we'd scoop out a hole and fill it full of water, and then I remember this was little kids, and we had little little tiny model-sized cars, 2 or 3 inches long, and made out of lead then, and we'd build roads and have sand piles and play things like that. And then as the kids got bigger, we played out in the street. We played baseball and up and down the street. Everything's in the street because it was years till the street ever got paved, and it wasn't too bad, and the houses weren't too close together, so we could.
There weren't so many cars.
There weren't so many cars, and we could
You
hit
always
the
had a
ball.
car? Your family?
We always had a car, I think, as far as I can remember. Dad never bought a new car that I know. He always had a big family-sized car. There were 6 of us kids, and we were close enough together that we, that is an age that we were all together at home, seemed like, and we went places together pretty much. Sunday afternoon, we always took a ride, and it seemed like the highlight there was to get an ice cream cone, and after we'd eaten that, then we'd end up down to Grandma's place or up at Andy's place. Now, some of you remember Andy. Chris and Carlisle doesn't. You remember Grandma? My mother's mother?
She died when Craig was born.
Yeah, I guess she did. I'd forgotten when it was. But we ended up down at her place, and we did more family-type things then, maybe, than people do now, because there wasn't so many places to go, and it wasn't so easy to get away. There weren't so many movies, and resorts were hard to get to. But we often took picnics up the canyon, and we always had a vacation. Dad would take 2 weeks, his 2 weeks vacation, and we went to practically every state west of the Mississippi sometime or another. California was a favorite place because my mother's sister May lived down in San Francisco.
Is that Carl and May?
Carl and May, But I remember going to Seattle, and the highlight of that trip was getting on the ferry boat and going over to Vancouver in British Columbia. And one thing that we remember there was we ran out of money, and Dad had to wire home for money. I don't know where he got it, but a check came and he couldn't cash it because he didn't know anybody there. And he had a friend that he had known years and years before the telephone company, and we spent 2 days trying to find him so he could be identified to cash the check. But we took 2 or 3 trips to the Grand Canyon and Zion's and Bryce's, and to Fish Lake. I remember going there a couple of times. And Brighton used to be a rather hard place to get to, but it was quite a popular place at that. The road was so steep going up there that a lot of the cars had to back up. Now this is because your low gear often wasn't quite as low as your reverse gear. And your reverse gear was being a lower gear range, you could back up the hill, or else everybody had to pile out of the car and walk up. Yeah, this is a place called the Stairs up Big Cottonwood Canyon. I don't know if it's still there. I think the sign is still there showing it, but the road now is smoothed out. Is there anything else you can think of that I didn't say?
Tell us about when you opened your mission, what you did then.
When I came home? I came home from mission. What did I do then? Oh, the war broke out. That is, Germany invaded Poland in August of 1939, and so they brought all the missionaries home, and I stayed there, one of the last ones to leave Sweden. But I left there, I believe it was September, and got home in October. It took about 10 days. And then it was only a week or so after that I got a job at the Western Electric Company. They were putting the dial system in Salt Lake, and they hired about 150 people. And so I started on there and worked with them 6 months there. Then they were going to do the same thing in Albuquerque. So a few of us got to go down to Albuquerque, and I went down there and lived for a year. And then before I'd gone on my mission, I'd taken an examination to get in the post office. In fact, they used to have one for post office clerks and one for what they called railway mail service then. which was for the ones that ran on the trains. And I had taken both of them, but the one for the Railway Mail came up first while I was in Albuquerque, so I took that job, and Mother came down and met me. She came down the bus, and we drove home in my little 1934 Plymouth Coupe. Pardon? No, my mother. That was in April of 1941, I guess. And I worked there until April of 1942 when I went in the Army, and then after 3.5 years, October of 1945, I came home. And what did I do after that? Then I came back to Ogden to live, and went back to work at the post office with the Railway Mail Service in the terminal in Ogden. And after 4 or 5 years there, I went out on the road as a clerk on the train.
Where did you meet Mama on this whole time?
Oh yeah, this was rather unique. She was working at the newsstand, had been doing this for a few years during the war, and the newsstand at the depot. And we used to go over there and get refreshments now and again, and that's where I met her. And one night about 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, I asked her if I could take her home, because that's when I was getting off work and when she got off work. So picked her up, and we didn't go straight home. We drove up the highway a ways.
I guess somewhere.
Not very far. We drove up, I think, as far as Perry or Willard or something like that, and then came back. And this was the beginning of a series of dates, and a lot of fun. It was November of when? 1941, I guess.
Yeah, just before Pearl Harbor.
Yeah. So we didn't really know each other too long between then and April 21st, when I went in the Army.
April 21st, you went in the Army?
In 1942. It was just...
Mom's birthday. Or hadn't she told you that much yet?
Or was it April 15th? It was right along in there. Yeah, that's right, it was her birthday. Anyway, we got married just a little over a year later.
You don't remember a year and then you got married?
I was in the Army all the time. We just kept writing letters, and she sent me magazines with pictures in, and the newspaper, and I called her up one time and on the telephone from Kansas. Sort of like. I sent her an engagement ring for December of 1942. Is that the way it went? In 1943 we got married.
No, wait a minute. You didn't even see each other. I did just write and said, okay.
Well, I had a couple of good pictures, and
I mean, but how long did you go out with each other before you went in the Army?
oh, from, was it October, November until April?
My goodness.
Yeah. Well, I guess she knew a good thing.
And you did too.
And the rest is history with which you're more or less familiar. Want to shut it off and give somebody else a chance?
Okay. Brian, since you're almost 8 years old, and what happens when you're 8 years old? Yeah, I thought I'd tell you about when I got baptized. When I was a little girl, they didn't have stake centers that have baptismal fonts in them. You either got baptized in the ditch or else you went down to Manti Temple, which was maybe 23 miles from Mount Pleasant. And we just had a new Model T Ford. And so one day, Daddy, which is great-grandpa, and his mother, which was my grandmother, took a cousin of mine and a friend of mine and me down to Manti Temple to be baptized. We were all baptized the same day. We were all 8. It wasn't right on our birthday. I was 8 in April, and this was after school let out. And we were baptized down there, and they let us go up this spiral staircase at the Manti Temple. It looks like the inside of a seashell. Can you see it, David?
Oh,
And you go round and round and round, and it leads you up to the top of the temple.
when you were to say that.
And it comes out up on this tower. And there's a platform up there. There was a little railing around it, and they let us go up there and sit. Do you want to pass it around so they can all see it? And you could see about all over several counties, and they pointed a lot of points of interest out to us while we were up there. But they don't let you use the stairs anymore, and I've always felt sorry because that was real fun. And I've always remembered that because it was a special day. And it took 2 or 3 hours to get that far, even in a Model T. It seemed like it took a long time. And then another thing I thought I'd tell you about that I did when I was a little girl. In the paper the last while, there have been pictures of flooding, both here in Ogden and in Salt Lake. And down in Mount Pleasant, the creeks would flood most every spring. And it'd be just thick, like almost like tapioca pudding. It'd be that thick. Mud. It'd just be mud, and it'd spill out onto the sides of the ditches, and it had the most peculiar smell. Just.
The sewers all were flooding.
Well, no, it was just the ditches, but when the mud would dry a little bit, it'd make the best clay, and we'd take this clay and make doll furniture out of it, mold all kinds of stuff out of it, and put it in the sun to dry. And then we'd play with it. And then where it had come out on the side of the ditches, after it had dried, it'd crack and sort of curl. And you could dissolve this, and it'd make real fine sand. And we spent a lot of time playing in things like this. And then when Daddy was telling about playing in sand pile, that was one of my favorite. And when I was even a big girl, it seems like, a lot bigger than kids play in sand piles nowadays. We used to wet the whole thing down and make a great big castle in the middle of it. And then tunnel through, so that you'd have tunnels going through it. And then we'd make roads going out, and we'd line them with flowers and little tiny rocks and shells, and make the whole sand pile, just a whole village. And we'd spend days doing this.
Sand, or was it that mud again?
No, this was sand. But you could sift this flood sand, and it was real fine, and it was fun to play with. Yeah, and then after a while, by the time the summer was over, it had all be gone, and then the next spring the creek had flood again, and it had but then when I was about in the 6th grade, they built a flood, what they call it, flood control thing up east of town, and so it caught all that, and we didn't have as many floods. But it was a lot of fun to play in this mud, because it was just different than anything I've ever played with. But those were things that you do when you don't have a lot of boughten toys.
Charge accounts and charge
What?
Did you have the same type of a childhood? Did you go on a lot of trips?
No, we didn't go on a lot of trips because my mother was ill. And we came to Ogden a couple of times in the Model T. And one time we came up here, there'd been a real bad flood in Farmington, and it had taken the roads out. And we had to detour, it seemed like, for hours.
That's my
And,
impression was going down.
It would take the whole day to get from Mount Pleasant to Ogden.
Really?
Uh-huh.
When would you spend the night before you came?
Oh, yes. We had Aunt Ada and Uncle I.J. That was Eliza's mother and father, and we always used to stay with them and have a lot of fun up here. But no, we'd go up to Brigham City and see Aunt Lucille and her family.
They lived up there even then.
Yeah.
Tell about Saturday night putting up hair. What were they wearing?
It wasn't the kids. Oh, this was when I was in high school, I guess. All the neighborhood ladies had come over, and I'd do 6 or 7 heads of hair every Saturday afternoon. Besides I was just a good Joe. Besides having to clean house and cook for Sunday and everything else.
Did they comb it out themselves?
Yeah, it wasn't. It was waves more than No, you'd wet it down with hair with flaxseed boiled in water.
Really?
And it was sticky like dippity-doo. I mean gooey, And then you'd finger wave it, And then you'd wind the ends around and put them in a pin curl, and it looked real doggy.
Neither one of you talked much about your dating. What did you used to do on your dates? Nowadays there's drive-ins and movies and television and different things like that you do. But what did you used to do?
Well, we used to go on picnics a lot. Easter was always a big thing.
With your family or with your date?
No, with a date. I mean, when we got old enough to date. I went with the twin, and one of my friends went with the other twin, and then Lois went with their best friend. And we'd sometimes walk, and sometimes they'd get a car. And there was always hills east of town that were not mountains, just hills, that were fun. And there was Mount Pleasant, and there was wildflowers, and it was fun to do this.
Sandwiches?
Yeah, sandwiches. And
Where'd you and Daddy used to go?
we went up shooting once, didn't we? And I found some wildflowers, and I wanted to pick them, and he wouldn't let me.
What kind of gun did you shoot?
22.
Pretty good shot?
I could hit the tin can, couldn't I?
How about your church activities?
Well, I taught Sunday school from the time I was about 15, and I taught primary from the time I graduated from primary until I left down there. And I was on the Mutual Stake Board, and I was doing all 3 of these at the same time.
You're kidding.
And
Was this Mount Pleasant?
Mm-hmm.
Along with being valedictorian and cheerleader?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was cheerleader in high school, and I wasn't valedictorian. I was just runner-up to the
Oh, but
valedictorian.
didn't you speak at graduation?
Yes.
How many
Yeah.
did your graduating class?
Oh, 90-some.
That big, you were a student body officer too, weren't you?
Well, cheerleader was considered student body officer. You got to go to student council. And,
Oh,
Tell about Hector.
well, the student body president and I had this thing. We tied and I don't know how it started, tied a string on a stick, and we called it Hector. It was our pet. And we drug it all over the high school. When he wasn't taking it, I was. took it to classes.
Like your pet? Was it kind of like a school joke?
Yeah.
Oh, you kind of like the school joke.
But and then when either one of us couldn't take it, we'd tie it to the radiator pipe in the principal's office.
Not the principal's office. I don't get it. Would you talk to it? Would you really relate to it?
Well, sure.
I understand it. Were you kind of screwy?
Well, it just sort of evolved, Somebody said, well, this looks like a dog, and so we tied a string around its neck.
You
And
used to go out with the president?
well, I did first, and then he started to date Lois, so I didn't go out with him anymore.
Back down graciously.
Yeah. But it was fun.
And what was the president's name?
Student body president,
I don't think so.
Marvin Maurer.
Did you ever have, I thought he was 5-year reunions and 10-year reunions?
Sure, we were down to 1 2 years ago.
10 years?
Yeah. Oh, it was 35 years.
I had an exciting childhood.
Yeah, sure did.
How come you got to leave and come up here to work at the depot?
Well, it was kind of dead down there and nothing to do, so.
How old were you?
Mm, 21 or 2, I guess.
Where did you live? We can't catch you.
Uh-huh.
Come here, I want to get up with it for a minute or two. You guys want a sweet little girl.
So how long had you been working at the depot before you met Dad?
I started to work in September and met him in October.
You started working in September and met him in October?
You want to get down
Wow, that
again?
was a quickie.
Right? This old man is no good for a young like you are.
You were telling us on the way down about how you hurt your thumb. I don't think the kids know about that. Do you want to tell them? They're interested.
Oh, I was standing working at a riveting machine, and first thing I knew, my thumb got in the way, and a soft rivet went right straight through my thumb. And I looked at it, and the fellow said, didn't hurt, and they looked at it, and said, you better get to the hospital and get that tended to, and I drove up there, and the old lady put something on it. They x-rayed it. The doctor says I could see right through that. I expected to lose it, but I didn't. He bandaged it up, fixed it up.
It healed over pretty well then.
Oh yes, you can see
Is it tender still?
it's a little tender, yeah, on the end of the neck.
Well, what were you doing with the riveting machine?
I was working.
What kind of work what were you making?
Oh, I don't remember. It's some light work, or I wouldn't have had that kind of rivets.
Can you tell the kids how you got started in that business, in the leather business? Tell the kids how you got started working in the leather work.
I don't remember how in the dickens I got started. Outside of my father giving me order, I said I got to learn a trade, and he put me in with an old harness maker.
How old were you when you did
What?
this? How old were you then?
Oh, I don't just remember.
You're just a young man,
Oh yes,
maybe 20 or something like that.
something like that.
Did you go to high school?
I was a great lad. I never was scared of any horse,
Uh-huh.
and I got to get on him. And I don't know this horse. I thought he was a tender one, soft horse. Went along in a kind of a draw, and darned if she didn't tip right over in that, landed on that leg.
And that's how you hurt your leg then.
Yeah, and I got up, and I guess 6 or 8 months after that, I'd ride a horse. They had sheep camp up over the mountain to Fish Creek Ridge, and I'd go up through Fairview, up through Milburn and Fairview, and over the mountain to the sheep camp one day, and then the next day I'd come home. That's the way I'd do it. Finally I got so, after that horse fell on that leg, then I told father, I said, I can't make it again anymore. And he said, all right, we put you to bed. And he undressed me and put me to bed. Happened that there was an old English doctor just across the fence from our home. And he called him in, old Dr. Woodring. He commenced to feed me fever medicine to hold the fever down, because there's an infection starting in that knee.
Uh-huh.
And got so bad that they sent, my sister was to Ephraim, to school. They sent for her, and they didn't know what to do. They thought sure I was going to die. And as I was laying there, all at once there was a man stood right ahead of me, right at my head of my bed. I don't know where he come from. He just like he dropped there. And I guess I talked to him. He said, I come to give you your choice. You could either live or die. And I didn't pay much attention to it. And the next day he repeated it again. You can either live or die. I said, I want, for my dear old mother's sake, I want to live. Because she was worrying about it a good deal. And it went on and on and on that way. Finally, I got so I can sit up. And they took me into the front room where I could sit and look out the window and see the cars, people go past. There's a couple of old fellows come in one Sunday afternoon. How would you like to be administered to? I said, that's just what I want now. And all right, so Brother Haven administered to me. And Brother Matt Sanderson sealed the anointment. And he said in his sealing in his prayer, he says, you're going to get well. You're going to get well. And I, gosh, a lot of other things, but that's the only thing I could remember because I was getting very down and out.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, but I finally made it.
Then you got better, and then did you start in the harness business, the leather business after this?
Well, Father said, well, he says, you'd better learn a trade. He said, that's what I advise to you, learn a trade. And there's old harness makers there, two of them, and one wanted to sell out, and Father bought the one, and he put me in there, and there I learned the trade. Hey, toot-toot-toot-toot, ha ha ha. Yeah, that's how I learned the trade.
And then you stayed in that shop all the time, didn't you?
Oh, yes, until he died. And then I run it. And the first thing I knew, one of my old best customers come up and said, Jim, you're getting to be a regular damn holdup. So that made me mad, and I just went in, packed my grip. And the train run from Mount Pleasant up to Salt Lake. I got on the train the next morning, went up to Salt Lake, and I caught a bus up to Ogden. And just as I got to the door, one of the Reed brothers was in the door. And I said, Bert, what's the show getting on here? Fine, fetch your tools and come right along.
When was this? What year, do you remember?
I don't remember the year.
Was it before the war? Long about the time...
During the war.
During the war, when the war was on? Materials, could you get plenty of materials?
I think it's after the World War II.
Uh-huh.
Because,
Materials were hard to get, weren't
yeah,
they?
yeah.
Well, you weren't the only child. You had a brother, didn't you?
I had a sister and a brother.
What was their names?
My
Remember?
sister was named Andre, and the boy was named...
Elmer?
what?
Was that Elmer?
No.
Yes, it was Elmer.
What?
Elmer. Elmer.
Yeah, Elmer, that's it.
Were they older than you?
Well, both younger.
Both younger.
I was the oldest one in the family.
What happened to them?
Well, the young lady, she got married to a man in Ephraim, and she moved up into Wyoming, and I don't know, something went wrong. She had to be operated on, and that didn't work right. She got an infection that fetched her back to Salt Lake in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And she lived about a week after that, and she was gone.
Oh.
And
What about Elmer? What happened to him?
well, he was teaching school there in Mount Pleasant, and the old janitor. The shop was on the west side, and they go around the corner and up the upper block in to the schoolhouse. And he went in there one morning. The old janitor was not in the house, in the school. He could see he'd been there. He went out the what do you call it? Where they have the heating plant.
Furnace room.
What?
Furnace room.
Yeah. And he was laying there on the floor, and there was a doctor within a block. He called him. He went in and gave him a shot in the arm and couldn't make him move, say. He found out he was dead.
Oh.
How old was he?
And what?
How old was he?
Who then?
Elmer.
Oh, I just don't remember. my memory's so darn poor. And
What did he die of? A heart attack? What did he die of?
who?
Elmer. I mean, what was his cause?
He went to school. He was got was pretty old enough to be the principal. And I was working at a shop just a block away. And they hollered for me, and I come up running up there. And darned if he hadn't, he got down to that janitor who was laying on the floor. The doctor gave him a shot and couldn't do it, and he wanted to know where they turned them electricity. And my brother just reached up and grabbed that, and darned if it didn't catch him. Electrocuted him, dead as a dead could be.
That's what it
Flipped over on the floor.
That's what happened to the janitor too then.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
It killed them both at
a
one
short
time.
circuit.
Oh, I get it.
Do you remember ever working with your father?
With my dad,
Uh-huh. What kind of work did he do?
he was a carpenter by trade.
Did you ever work with him?
No, well, I just to go along and help him in lifting things around best I could. And after he got a little bit, he said, "No, my boy," he said, "I want you to learn a trade."
Uh-huh.
And this old harness maker, one of them, wanted to quit. Bought in, and I got to work with him, the harness maker. And I worked with him. I learned the trade. I could build a harness just as good as he could. Darned if he didn't die one time, just quickly. Had a kind of a heart attack and was gone.
How did you meet your wife,
Oh.
the girl's mother?
I
Do you remember?
this. Barton,
Uh-huh.
Sylvester Barton, he lived just a block away from where I was. And I went to church. Went to church, and mutual rather, in the evening, and young lady come and grabbed me in the arm and says, "Well, you going home?" And I'll walk with you. I said, "All right." And there's a picture show right across the corner. I said, "Well, let's go take you in that show." She said, "All right." That's how it got started. She year or better. She was up to Ogden. She had work up here, and I came up, and then I'd go home. Then we'd come up. One trip she come home. I was there with my father and mother having lunch, and she come in. I don't know. She come in, and got a hold of me. That was the start of it. It wasn't long after that we got, but the Mantine got married in the temple. Yeah. So